Three, two, one. All right, every guest that joins us on ZASLOW Show 2.0, of course, is brought to us by the official beer of the program. We're talking Johnny Cuba, European roots of the Caribbean soul. You can pick up a six-pack of Johnny right now. And don't forget, always drink responsibly. Joining us here, of course, you know him from one of the frontman, founder of one of the all-time great rock bands, Smashing Pumpkins, but also owner and promoter of probably the most storied wrestling promotion there is out there. And that, of course, is the NWA, who has their 75th anniversary show this weekend. Fight TV, 2 nights, this Saturday and Sunday, the 26th and 27th. Thanks a lot for joining us, Billy. I appreciate it. Everybody down here in South Florida knows I'm a huge pro wrestling fan, even though we're a sports show primarily. So it's really cool to have you aboard here. And, of course, the NWA. So I'll tell you like this. I have a good friend of mine. His all-time favorite band is Smashing Pumpkins. I say, hey, Billy Corgan is going to be on my show tomorrow. And he was stunned when I said, hey, he owns the National Wrestling Alliance. So do you still get some of that where they're like, wow, I didn't know Billy Corgan is so big into wrestling?
Yeah, I've been in professional wrestling now for over 10 years, and I've owned the company for about 6. And yeah, not a day goes by where people go, what are you doing? You're totally insane. I had no idea. And then they're even more shocked when they find out that I own the NWA, which is the oldest professional wrestling body in the world, 75 years as we speak. So it's been a very interesting journey, both from the music side and then also from the wrestling side.
I'm curious, when you purchased the NWA, do you have to kind of prove yourself to the guys and girls in the locker room that, you know, you have everybody's best interests involved? You don't want to be viewed as a carpetbagger. You want everybody to know that, hey, listen, yeah, I'm Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins, but, you know, this is serious business here. I want the NWA to be as successful as it used to be, and even further than that. So what was like the transition like there when you first purchased the NWA?
Well, honestly, it went back a little earlier to the spirit of your question, which was I was working for a company called TNA, which many fans now would know as Impact Wrestling. The company at the time was owned by Dixie Carter and was a successful company. At their peak, they were making about $40 million a year. They were probably the second biggest wrestling company in the world at the time. So I went to work in the front office on the booking committee, but also producing behind the scenes. So that was really the first time, and this goes back about 7-8 years ago now. That was the first time where I really started interacting with talent on a daily level, shooting vignettes, the promos when the talent would talk to camera, stuff like that. And talent was really surprised that I was in there not just to be a figurehead or, provide some financial or celebrity support, but I was actually going to be in the trenches and work with the talent. So I'd kind of made my rep in the TNA days. So when I bought the NWA, a lot of the people I worked with in the beginning had already worked with me. So I was kind of already past that sort of point of doubt. And looking back, it was frustrating because I thought, look, I've been in the entertainment business for a long time. I made 25 music videos. It's just at the end of the day, it's the video production, television. But wrestling is very particular in how it views outsiders. And I had to sort of navigate that coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for instance, I grow up, I'm a little boy, I'm a huge WWF, WWE fan, and they'll bring in music acts to whatever big show, and yeah, like, they'll get booed out the building, because if you're from the outside, like the wrestling fan, the wrestling community, they're very skeptical of the outsiders. But I would imagine it sounds like you were grinding backstage with these guys, like, so you earn their respect when they see you working on all the behind the scenes stuff.
Well, the key thing in the business for the talent is, can you help them get over? And for people who don't know what that means in the wrestling language, it means, can you raise their value on the open market so that when they do an autograph show or they're hired by an independent wrestling company, they're worth more on the street in terms of their value. So that's where you really make your mark, when you start to show that you can work with them to up their value in the marketplace. And that's something the NWA has been very good at doing, at taking talents that have been disregarded, overlooked, discarded at times, repackaging them and giving them the opportunity to show why they're talented and why they deserve value in the wrestling economy. And it's It's not an easy thing to do. You really have to understand the business. It takes time. And I didn't grow up in the business, so I had to kind of get a crash course to it.
Do you have I feel like everyone who's a huge pro wrestling fan, like you, like myself, we have that moment that we kind of fell in love with pro wrestling. Do you remember what it was for you?
Yeah, I would have been about 4 years old watching professional wrestling on Chicago television, in the Dick the Bruiser, Crusher, Baron von Raschke, those types of guys, Vern Gagne, Bobby Heenan, Blackjack Lanza. So that's what I was watching. I was four with my great grandmother, who was 80, and a Belgian native, barely spoke any English. So if you can imagine that contrast of watching this very surreal television product, not really understanding what I was watching, but I was watching my great grandmother sort of enjoy it. And so that's sort of where this journey begins, about 52 years ago.
And back then, she thought it was serious fighting back then.
Well, we call that the era of kayfabe. And up until 1980 something, 89 maybe, when Vince McMahon admitted, yes, it's staged combat, I believe was the term he used. And really, they did it for tax reasons. If anybody ever wants to investigate that, it wasn't because of some altruistic thing where they finally admitted to the public they pulled this contrivance for years. The thing about it was it came up out of the carnivals, and it was important to convince the fans, or the marks as they're known, that what they were watching was real, and that it begins the art of professional wrestling. How do you convince an arena full of people, in WWE's case, sometimes a stadium full of 80,000 people, that what they're watching is not only real, but to those that know that it's not real, they, like a good movie, they lose themselves in the excitement and they just get into the action. And that's the beauty of professional wrestling. It has such a strange background, but when it's done right, it's really fantastic. And of course, if you're a fan, you know what that is. So everybody pretty much has a good idea of good and bad professional wrestling.
It's funny because when you say for tax purposes, they had to kind of let you behind the scenes. I think it was for a show in New Jersey at the time, if I'm remembering correctly. That's so funny. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds accurate. Yeah. They were getting killed on taxes because they were presenting it as a legitimate sport.
Yeah.
And I think Vince had figured out that if he said, no, it's just entertainment, they would save a whole lot of money. So they just flipped the switch. And, what's funny about it is, of course, many people owning the NWA, you hear about it all the time. They're sentimental for the era of kayfabe where wrestling was presented as real. But to be fair to Vince and everything that followed, wrestling has only gotten bigger ever since.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what held it back, was a lot of people were like, come on, there's no way that this is real. There's no way people could take that level of punishment.
NWA 75th anniversary show this Saturday and Sunday. It's taking place in St. Louis, but of course you could order on Fight TV. You're on the World as a Vampire tour right now. I know you were here this past weekend in West Palm Beach. I was working that night. Otherwise, I would have come to see you guys. I've seen you guys a couple times. How do you find the balance between NWA and right now touring with Smashing Pumpkins?
I'll give you a perfect example. We had wrestling on the show yesterday. We actually had wrestling in West Palm the other day too. So during the day of the show, I was dealing with the wrestlers and dealing with booking the card. We had 5 matches in between the bands yesterday. Then I played a show. It was about 105 degrees on stage. About killed me. Passed out about 3 times. Took a 9-hour bus ride to Philadelphia. Got off the bus at about 10 o'clock this morning, and I immediately started working on the NWA 75 and the television tapings to follow cards. So there's the answer to your question. It's just I try to find work when I can.
How far out do you find you have to write, or at least help write shows? How far are your sites set?
About three months generally. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And how many people? I mean, you must have a handful of writers too. Like, you're not the only one.
No, sir. I write all the shows by myself. I write and book everything.
Wow.
And work with Pat Kenny, who many fans would know as Simon Diamond from his TNA and ECW days. Pat runs talent relations, so he deals with the talent, and I deal with everything else on the creative side. Of course, we talk at times because it involves contractual structuring and things like that, where we're going with the booking. But, about 97% of the decisions are made by myself alone. And I don't even always tell everyone what's happening until the day of a show. Because, sometimes when you open that door, you get to people start politicking you. And it's definitely a labor of love, and something that I've worked very hard to do to bring the NWA back to international prominence. When I bought it, people laughed and said, "You're buying something that's completely worthless. Don't bother bringing it back." Even Eric Bischoff himself, somebody I would consider a friend, said it was a mistake for me to bring it back. But here we are 6 years later running our 75th anniversary show. And look, it's like the same thing I went through with the band. People told me I was crazy. You can't do it. You'll never make it. And you're never going to tell me that, because I did make it. And everybody that told me I was wrong later came back and apologized. So hopefully there'll be a day they'll say the same thing about the NWA, because I believe the upside is there.
So you own and you're writing for the most storied wrestling promotion there is in the NWA. Do you feel like, what's the sense of responsibility that you feel to that? I mean, you're writing the NWA.
Well, it's difficult because wrestling, like a lot of other things in entertainment, has a trendiness to it. But I believe the real upside of the NWA is not to be trendy. And I've taken a sort of contrarian course there in trying to bring back what I would call mainstream wrestling for the mainstream fan. Many fans have walked away from the major promotions, not because the wrestling isn't great. They just don't understand what's happening. It's too nuanced. It's too layered. And for someone like myself, who grew up in the 70s and 80s, wrestling was an easy, real upsell. You either got into it, you believed in Dusty Rhodes versus, the Road Warriors or whatever. You either got it or you didn't. And these days, even myself in professional wrestling, I have a hard time following what's going on. There's a lot of subculture stuff. There's a lot of internet stuff, and I get it. It's a different world. But I do believe that wrestling's at its best when it reaches across the aisle and reaches everybody, every political, social divide possible. And I believe that's when wrestling is at its best. And that's the bet I'm making on NWA, is that we can bring back a very mainstream product to a very mainstream audience.
So Tyrus, of course, who, has been in the wrestling business for a very long time, is the NWA world champion. I know the main event, EC3, is taking him on this weekend in a bull rope match on night number 2. But I am curious what your thoughts were, and if there was any hesitation on your part where, the political landscape in this country is in such a strange place. And of course, Tyrus is a regular contributor on Fox News, and he's got the NWA World Championship with him there on television. For promotional purposes, amazing for you guys, obviously. But was there any kind of trepidation because of, obviously, the wild political landscape that we're in this country?
Yeah, that's always a difficult question to answer. And I guess the simplest way I would put it is, you cannot let outside forces determine the course of your promotion. It's the same in my musical life. I have people in my ear all the time. Do this, don't do that. Say this, don't say that. And you name it, any number of causes, any number of agendas. And I think they're all valuable. I'm really a libertarian in that sense. I believe everyone deserves a seat at the table. I believe everyone deserves to be heard. But when you start getting into excluding particular people because of their backgrounds or what they may or may not represent, I just can't get with that. Because I don't think that's America. I think you have to let everybody sit at the table, and you should duke it out in the realm of public idea. And so no trepidation.
Now, locally, I'm friendly with some of the guys who run a couple of local promotions here. BRCW, Boca Raton Championship Wrestling, CCW Wrestling. They're both a lot of fun down here in South Florida. And NWA has been working and doing some shows down here with BRCW, right?
Yeah, I actually have been vacationing the last few years over the winter in Boca, and I saw that they were running, and I thought, wow, these are very, very credible cards. So we reached out to him, talked about doing a co-promotional type of thing. One of our wrestlers, or one of our champions, Kerry Morton, son of Ricky Morton of Rock and Roll Express, is the NWA Junior Heavyweight Champion. And I saw he was working down there, so he was kind of the conduit, and we put together a versus card, NWA versus Boca Raton Championship Wrestling. So it went very well. We filmed it. We put some of those matches up on our YouTube channel, the NWA's YouTube channel, and we hope to do more stuff in the future. I'm looking to try to bring back the regional and territorial feel of the NWA. It's still baby steps to work it out, because it's their promotion. They deserve every respect in that. And you can't just come in and say, well, you got to do it this way, and it's got to be this way because we're the NWA. So working and trying to find that common ground is something worth working towards. But look forward to it. And they're doing a great job down there.
Who was your favorite wrestler growing up, Billy?
Would have been Dick the Bruiser. He was the biggest star in Chicago. all through the 70s into the 80s. An absolute legend. And he really represented the working class ethos. In many ways, he was the archetype for what everyone would know like as Stone Cold Steve Austin, the hell raising, beer drinking, guy at the end of the bar who's willing to take on the whole room. But somehow he's a baby face. Traditionally that guy in wrestling up until Dick the Bruiser showed up somewhere in the late 50s, early 60s, that would have been a heel. So he created the prototype of the kind of the anti-hero as a babyface, the good guy who was willing to take on the biggest bully, but in a way that was different. He was brash and he certainly thought he was good looking too. So that stuck in my mind as being outsized. And of course, there's a lot of parallels in entertainment, music business. Sometimes you can have someone who's so outlandish that they almost become a babyface. Where normally most people would recoil from a personality, they're attracted to certain types of personalities.
So you certainly, I mean, obviously you love pro wrestling. How do you keep the love for it as a fan? Because it is now also work for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say this, out of 365 days in the year, if I'm a pro wrestling fan, at least more than half of those days, I'm doing all right. Because there's a lot of days in pro wrestling where you just think it's just not worth it. It's just too complicated. Just to give you an example, with NWA 75 coming up this weekend, I think we have something like 80 wrestlers coming into the building over the 2 nights. And then when you add additional personnel, there's probably about 130 to 140 NWA people in the building at any given time. So that's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of egos, a lot of distractions. Somebody's always complaining about something. Somebody always did or said something. Right. And you have to navigate all that. But look, wrestling runs as a sort of interesting business in that most people who work in professional wrestling, they don't work for me. They work for me like on a per date basis. So I don't really have any control over what they do in their lives. We have wrestlers that do OnlyFans. I mean, there's a lot of things today. There are unique challenges to 2023. But unless they're an actual employee of the company, there's not much I can say. I mean, it's basically you meet in the middle and you try to do good business. That is historically the way professional wrestling has worked, for the NWA in particular. So it's not always the easiest navigation, and not everybody has the same focus on what's best for the NWA as you do.
Billy, I know that you are obviously you're a huge, well, I shouldn't say obviously, I know you are, but you're a huge sports fan. You're a Chicago guy. I know you're a Cubs fan. You're a big sports fan. So I want you to fill in the pie chart for me here, okay? Between your love for sports, Chicago sports, pro wrestling, music. What's the pie chart looking like?
That's an interesting question. Well, music has dominated my life, so we'll give it at least 51%. The Cubs, we're going through another rebuild, although they're doing a good job right now. So, I can't say my love for the Cub wanes, but my interest at time wanes. I'd say it's probably, it's a pretty even split there with wrestling and the Cubs on the other side of the pie chart.
Okay.
Once you're born into the Cubs thing, you can never escape. My grandmother was a Cubs fan. She was 162 game a year, listen on the radio type of fan. So you can never get that, that the smell of the ivy out of your nose, for lack of a better analogy for today.
What was it like for you as a Cubs fan when they finally won? What was it, 2018?
Was it 2016 already?
16 maybe, yeah. What was it like for you experiencing that?
Well, luckily enough, MLB was able to get me tickets to the Game 7 in Cleveland. So I was sitting 10 rows back behind home plate. Not a bad seat to watch the Cubs win. Of course, everybody remembers that Cleveland came back in that game. Cubs about blew it. And then finally, because of course I was there for the Bartman game too. I wasn't there for the GOAT stuff, but I was definitely there for the Bartman game. Remarkably, here comes a rain delay. And how long was that rain delay? It was, I believe, I could be wrong, it was either 13 or 17 minutes. But and when they came back in the field, it was like they were a different team. Their body language looked different. They looked very focused, and they ended up winning that game. So, look, my grandmother lived to about 103. She never saw the Cubs win a World Series. She was born in 1911, and you could do the math from there. So imagine she lived 103, never saw the Cubs win a World Series. So I started thinking I would be like my grandmother here and go all the way. So at least I got one, and hopefully there'll be more. I'm still a young man.
That's great. Finally here, again, NWA 75 this weekend, Fight TV. You could order it. 75th anniversary show this Saturday, and Sunday night. The World is a Vampire tour, one of the all-time great rock bands, Smashing Pumpkins, of course. Do you still how do you make sure you keep I guess not energized, but how do you make sure you still enjoy playing all of your songs from all of these years for, the longtime Smashing Pumpkins fans? How do you make sure that it doesn't get monotonous for you?
You learn to put yourself in the moment that you're in. So what I try to do when I'm singing a song that I wrote 30 years ago is I don't try to sing it like I sang it 30 years ago. I don't try to sing it from the same emotional place. So, for example, if I'm singing a song like Disarm, instead of thinking of myself like I would have 30 years ago, I think about my children. My children are very young. And I think about how I've been able to provide them a different and better life than the one that I had. So I try to come at the song from a different perspective. It also helps that we're looking out at a lot of young people all of a sudden, for whatever reason, whether it's streaming services or being used by Rick and Morty. Suddenly there's tons and tons of young people who are coming to our concerts. Probably 50% of the audience is under 25 all of a sudden.
Wow.
So when you hear that sound coming up at audience, you see that enthusiasm. It takes you back, and that makes it a little bit easier to connect to your youthful energy. Well, but it is not in a negative way. It's a challenge because the audience deserves a fresh performance. I think we've all been there. We've gone to see a legend that we like, and we feel a little bit that they're phoning it in. And there's a kind of disappointment, like, hey, they're playing my favorite song, but gee, I wish they could be a little more into it. I've tried not to be that person. And at times it's a struggle because, I don't know how many times I've sang a Rat in the Cage, but it's we're probably up there about 2,000 times at this point, right?
Yeah.
I don't feel like a rat in the cage anymore. So I got to come at it from a different place, but it does tend to work that way.
One of those songs, maybe it's from Siamese Dream, or maybe it's from Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Was there a song that you wrote from one of those early albums that, became just huge and you didn't understand, like you didn't expect everyone to gravitate toward it the way that they did?
Bolo with Butterfly Wings, the Rat in the Cage song, as everyone calls it, that just totally shocked me. I wanted a different song to be the first song off the album, and the record president at the time, a man named Phil Cordero, called me at my house. I could still see my standing in the kitchen on my my kiddie phone, and he's telling me, "Look, we got to release this song first. I'm telling you, this is a hit song." And I said, "But the song's so stupid." And he said, "I'm telling you, it's a hit song. Okay, you got to trust me. You got to trust me." And it was a massive song, and it's still a massive song. In fact, the song is being used in the new Dracula movie that's coming out. I was sitting there with my kids the other day. I forgot I'd given permission to have the song, and we're sitting there watching the trailer, and suddenly my voice wafts up out of the speakers, and I about fell out of the chair. I totally forgot. My kids are looking at me like, "Was that you?" Yeah, it's amazing. You put it this way, you can write a song and you can think it's the best song ever, and everyone thinks it's a bomb. No one cares. They ain't going to be playing it at your funeral. And then you could write something in about 20 minutes. You think, oh, that's not bad. And you're 30 years later and people are still asking about it. So it's amazing. It's something you can't predict. But, kind of like baseball, if you can get enough hits, they'll keep you around.
How old are your kids?
7 and 4.
Okay, so I guess I would probably have to ask you again in a few years from now. But like, do you feel like is that going to mean anything to them when they realize, Daddy is the frontman and founder of Smashing Pumpkins? Like, are they going to care?
They figured it out already. Trust me, they figured it out. They're pretty aware. They were just on stage with me the other night, actually in West Palm. So they were dancing on stage in front of, a good 15,000 people there. Now they're pretty aware. I don't think they really understand what it means because obviously they don't have a global perspective, but they know when we go into a restaurant, it's not uncommon for someone to come up. It is pretty funny because sometimes a guy will come up and I'm friendly and nice, and the guy will walk away and my daughter will go, "How do you know that guy?" you know? And I'm like, "No, he just knows me. He's just a fan of Daddy's band." So it's cool. They live a pretty wonderful life. So I don't think they've connected all those pieces yet, but they definitely understand what Dad does for a living.
Smashing Pumpkins right now. The World is a Vampire tour. Again, like Billy said, they were just here a few days ago. NWA 75. It's a monster show. 75th anniversary. Night 1 and night 2 this Saturday and Sunday. Fight TV. Billy, I really enjoyed this. I appreciate. Look, you're clearly very busy. I appreciate you spending some time here with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Thanks for the support, and I'll see you on the weekend, everybody. Thank you.